Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this special event hosted by the Texas Exes Sustainability Alumni Network in partnership with Planet Texas 2050 and UT Energy Institute. I'm Sandy Epen, president of the Sustainability Alumni Network and a proud O1 chemical engineering alum, and thrilled to be here with all of you. The Sustainability Alumni Network was founded a year ago to activate a global community of UT Austin alumni passionate about sustainability. Our mission is to inspire action, foster collaboration, and drive real-world impact at the university and worldwide by connecting alumni, faculty and staff, students, and the broader community. Since launching, we formed a volunteer board, have grown to over 450 members, and have organized several relationship building and education events. And when we talk about alumni driving impact, it's not just about environmental sustainability, it's also about creating meaningful social change as well. So topics such as diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights are all under the umbrella of sustainability. With 120,000 Texas Exes members and a lot more living UT alumni worldwide, the opportunity to drive collective impact is huge and urgently needed in today's landscape. We must continue to accelerate broad collaboration across sectors to advance research, investment, policy, and innovation to create a more sustainable and equitable future. And that's why I invite alumni, faculty, and staff to join our growing Sustainability Alumni Network by going through our Texas Exes website as well as our LinkedIn page. And we've got sign-up sheets outside. Tonight's panel, moderated by fellow UT alum and Professor Michael Weber, explores two key themes UT continues to shape: AI and energy. And these two topics are shaping the future of our planet: how we power our lives, allocate resources, and build sustainable and resilient systems. Tonight, we'll hear diverse perspectives from experts working at the forefront. Following this panel, we'll have a 10 to 15-minute Q&A, audience Q&A, but afterwards, we're gonna have a networking happy hour from 6 to 7, a couple of doors down. So definitely feel free to join us and continue the conversation. Before we begin, I do want to express my sincere gratitude to our partners, Planet Texas 2050, Heidi Schmalbach, Jonathan Llewellyn team, the UT Energy Institute, to our sponsor, RWE, whose generous support is allowing us to live stream and broaden our reach. To our esteemed panelists, we're really thankful for your time and excited to hear your insights. Special thank you to Jamie Walenta and the rest of our network board for your leadership in bringing this event to life, and to Texas Exes and Jim Walker for your ongoing support in building this network. And finally, thanks to all of you for being here. Tonight is about more than just listening. It's about learning, connecting, and inspiring action. And so with that, let's dive in. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Michael Weber, who is our professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the Engineering School.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sandy, and I appreciate. Oh, they're clapping already. We haven't even done anything. I appreciate that. I will tell you, in classes, the students do not clap before you speak, and they also don't clap after you speak. So it's very nice to be here and appreciate the opportunity to be part of this network. I am an alum, as you heard. Some people know this. I was born just a few blocks away, West Campus. My father was a professor of chemistry here for 40 years. So I grew up on campus, and then I was a student here in aerospace engineering and Plan 2, and met my wife in the Longhorn Band, who was also a UT student. And my brother and sister came here. My mother worked for the coach, Fred Akers, if any of you remember that coach, and worked for Dean Kosmetsky, if you ever knew Dean Kosmetsky. And all three of my kids are here, so I'm a UT guy, I guess I'll say. And my oldest is now an alum of UT. She's a music performance person, and my middle one is a fifth-year senior in industrial design and sustainability. He wants to do sustainable design for his life. And then our freshman 18-year-old, who, actually, I'm sorry, he turned 19 yesterday, I've lost track, is a mechanical engineering student also interested in sustainability. So we're Longhorns through and through and touching sustainability one way or another. And I think the AI and energy and sustainability topic is an interesting one because it's complex, because AI is an exacerbant of some of our energy problems, but also a potential pathway to some solutions. So we can talk about what it does that's bad and what it does that's good and what some of the risks are moving forward. And it's at the convergence of engineering and policy and social sciences and humanity. I would say that I feel like I'm deeply involved in energy and a novice at AI, but I was looking back at my records. I actually took a class in grad school in 1999 on neural networks. So I've actually, which is some of the foundational math or related math. So I've been dabbling with AI, whether I meant to or not, for over 25 years at this point. And I got an A in neural networks. I don't know what neural networks are, but I am good at repeating back to the professor what they want to hear. So I got an A. And the professor who taught that class was a man named Bernie Woodrow. He was a beloved, esteemed professor of electrical and computer engineering at Stanford, who's still alive, and he's in his 90s now. His first student, and I was like one of his last students, but his first student was a man named Ted Hoff. I don't know if that name means anything to you, but Ted Hoff invented the microprocessor, and he was like employee number 10 at Intel. And so his first student invented the microprocessor, and then one of his last students was me. So the world has fallen deeply since then, but he taught this class on neural networks and the math. In the end, artificial intelligence is just math, but it is useful math for pattern recognition and convergence to the mean. And so I took that class decades ago, don't know what it means. But then in 2019, I took leave from UT, and I was based in Paris, France. I worked at a company called Engie, a very big energy company, and I was their Chief Science and Technology Officer, and I moderated a panel in Abu Dhabi at the World Energy Council with the person for United Arab Emirates in charge of artificial intelligence. They had someone in charge of AI since 2017. In the United States, we still don't have someone in charge. Like, there's no one in charge, right? And we had a conversation about AI and energy back in 2019. So in some ways, this is a topic I've been bouncing against for years, and I have no idea what it means, but it does seem relevant and important. And it feels like we're in this frothy time where every day there's another announcement. And the announcement yesterday is basically the AI hype cycle is here, the bubble has burst. And today was Meta spending $200 billion on AI. So I don't know if the bubble's burst or we're about to do $200 billion, but clearly AI is relevant, and it feels like we're at a turning point, kind of the way the rise of the internet was a turning point, where we'll talk about the world before and after AI and what it means, this kind of thing. The math has been around since the 60s, but the generative AI that's accessible with these tools for all of us seems relatively newer, and it's going to affect some of the businesses for some of the people on the panel and some of our livelihoods. It will affect how we teach. As it is, students use AI to write their essays, and then professors use AI to grade those essays. So life is changing. We'll talk about whether that's good or bad, what it means. Blue books are coming back. Do you remember blue books? Yeah, they're coming back because you can't hack a blue book, and you can't have AI write the blue book for you, as far as I know. So maybe that will be how things change. We have a great panel of experts and engaged sort of people with a lot of experience and perhaps enthusiasm even for the topic to talk about it. And so I'll introduce all of them briefly. They'll make some comments. We'll have some conversation, then we'll go to you for your questions. To my immediate right, looking left from your side, Dr. Alyson Freeman, deeply involved in the national labs and the world of tech for a long time now at Dell, and she's very engaged on campus in a variety of ways. So it's great to have her here. We have also Seyi Fabode, do I pronounce it correctly? RWE.
You did great.
RWE, another one of these multinational energy companies doing a lot of work in Texas, who's hired 2 of my former students. I don't know if you know that. So very glad to be sending you students. Please hire more. So he'll be talking about some of the energy needs. Professor Javad Mohammadi, a relatively new professor here at UT, working on AI, and he works on AI and smart systems, energy infrastructure, and also teaching energy or infrastructure entrepreneurship, and I teach energy entrepreneurship, so we need to combine and teach a class together at some point. And then we also have Margo Weisz, who's been a long time involved in a variety of nonprofits, including TEPRI, Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute, and engaged on campus, and also won all sorts of awards as well, Austinite of the Year, and just Star Person of the Year. So anyway, a beloved member of the Austin community in a variety of ways. So they'll offer different insights for us, and we'll start with Margo, if you can make a couple comments about this, and we'll move way back down the table.
So I'm with an organization called TEPRI, and we address the acute energy needs of people who contend with low incomes throughout the state. So you may be thinking like, well, what does AI have to do with that? And so we're looking at it largely from the solutions end, although we have a real deep interest in any sort of negative potential impacts. I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot today about what an energy pig these data centers are, and so how that will affect the stability of the grid and how we might think about locating the generation, and who pays for that sort of infrastructure. It's a tremendous amount of infrastructure, and so we're real interested in how that doesn't fall on the shoulders of those that are most vulnerable and can least afford those kinds of investments to accommodate the needs of AI. We're also really interested in the siting of AI, because it causes noise. There's a lot of issues around the siting of it, so we're interested in that end of it. However, most of our energy right now is looking at sort of potential solutions, and we're real interested in a technology called virtual power plants, and we're looking at, so they're quite complex. And so my husband's here, and he would say, don't go there. And so I don't know how much we're going to go there today, but we're looking at them in a very discrete way. We're looking at solar and battery storage, that you can use the surplus solar, store it in the battery, and then when demand is sort of at peak levels, you can then sell your battery back into the market. So it's sort of this very distributed generation that the future is going to look like, where generation is happening in very small ways, and that you might actually be able to generate some revenue by selling, aggregating this small generation and selling it into the grid. And so we're looking at how do we use that to sort of afford energy infrastructure at multifamily or at community-based resiliency hubs. How do we look at a way in the future of paying for kind of the energy needs of the future by using these potential revenue-generating activities? So that's kind of where we are. We're looking at other interesting innovations in the field as well that might bring some solutions to people who are vulnerable, whether that's from an affordability standpoint, energy burden standpoint, or from a resiliency standpoint. Or we do a lot of surveying of low-income households, and there's actually a really strong interest in clean energy. So how do we potentially use AI as a way to make clean energy infrastructure affordable? So.
I want to build on something you said, that there's some concern about impact on ratepayers. And I would say that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick talks about this, and Senator Elizabeth Warren also talks about this.
Yep.
So you have a very liberal senator and a very conservative lieutenant governor talking about this concern that maybe ratepayers will be asked to pay more so that the richest companies in the world will get richer. And that doesn't feel very good for a lot of political constituencies. I think it's a fair concern. There's a hearing tomorrow on some of the
Yep.
studies, right? So there's legislation going on. Can you go a little bit further? But it might make rates higher for poor people so that they make rich people richer, but it also might solve the problem. Can you go just a little bit deeper on some of that conundrum about what your concerns are with ratepayers and consumers?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of that the infrastructure for the transmission and the distribution to accommodate the needs will be very, very expensive. And so right now, Texas is a very complex energy environment, so I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with sort of the 5 sort of distinct energy markets that we contend with. But most of Texas is in a competitive market, and the transmission distribution where the investments will have to happen are lie with the utilities, and who will pay for that. And right now, because we never sort of envisioned these like massive investments that will need to take place, it's just not clear. And as Michael says, who will pay for it? We don't have a system right now. We don't have a market structure that clearly assigns pricing to users. It's just wasn't envisioned this way. So I think there is a lot of understanding and interest that it could be problematic and not equitable, and that the residential sector shouldn't really have to bear the cost of, these companies. So I think there's a lot of solutions out there. There's just right now a lot of discussion about solutions, let me say. So I think that's sort of where we are. I think sort of the largest discussion is around locating generation next to these data centers and having the companies like invest in that generation themselves, because then the way the electron goes, it's generated and the users would use that energy rather than having to use the distribution and transmission lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of popularity around BYOG, bring your own generator, and that.
Right, that's probably the biggest discussion, but there's also, I mean, the market is a game. It's a board of rules and how you play, and right, so far we just need to figure out how to look at that so that those that are using the energy are paying for it from a distribution, not a generation, just a generation standpoint.
I guess like all policy battles is about who pays and who benefits, but that discussion's live because this wasn't sorted out 10 years ago, so it's happening in real time.
Right now.
In Texas and other markets around. And you also, just doing nothing doesn't help, because creation of data centers will create jobs, which will be good for poverty and all. So that we got to.
Not really a lot of jobs, actually.
All right, we'll come back to that. Javad, you think about AI, you teach about AI, you use AI in your research, you know a lot about infrastructure. What are some of your thoughts that we should have in mind?
Yeah, so I I mainly look at AI from two perspectives. Like, what are the issues that come with it? Like, obviously, one of the big ones is the load that they're adding to the grid, and how much energy they are consuming. The other one is like how they could be fooled or deceived, or what will be the impact of that on the operation of the grid. We are having a lot of these tools being integrated into our day-to-day decision making, and when it comes to operation of the electric grid, we want to make sure supply is equal demand at all times. So if they get involved into, as in they're getting more integrated into the decision makings and controllers that are being deployed on the grid, if we have middlemen that are intruding to the system, or they are their data is poisoned or whatnot, that could have a significant impact at scale on the grid. At the same time, AI tools could be really useful for speeding up a lot of decision making that we are doing. Again, going back to supply equal demand equation, a lot of our supply side outputs are changing fast. We have a lot of grid trigger events, climate trigger events that are impacting the situation of our electric infrastructure. So we need faster and faster decision making. And AI could be really helpful there, try to speed up the decisions that we make, try to make the problem more scalable. We could account for a lot of more variables in your decisions, but at the same time, we need to make sure whatever solution we get from them, they are deployable. And that's one of the biggest concern for the system operators, how trustable the AI solutions that they get out of these tools are. Can they deploy that? If they deploy those, would the grid fail because it's mathematically speaking, is that optimal but not feasible? If it's not feasible, it's not respecting the physics of the grid. So that's not a good solution. They can implement those. So a lot of those ideas around AI, like how we could integrate that and how we could be mindful of having safeguards as we are doing the deployment implementation.
That's great. And I bet you have students who are interested in the topic. Are students signing up for more classes around artificial intelligence? Are they looking at careers in this? It seems like a hot topic among the student body.
Absolutely. All of their classes are, I think, waitlisted. And there's a lot of interest in like seeing how they could use AI and large language models for a lot of the...
Not just to cheat on their essays, but actually to create career. But I would say also, if you look at the faculty searches going on in engineering, most of our faculty searches, there's an AI component. It might be water and AI, or energy and AI, or material science and AI. So AI is showing up, certainly in the research enterprise, but I think more and more in the teaching world as well. It's great. Seyi, you want to share some of your perspective on good and bad or whatever on artificial intelligence and energy and sustainability?
Yeah, so between 2000 and 2008, I worked at a power station that, I'm sure we were talking about this earlier, a power station, combined cycle gas plant. I haven't paused before I say that now because we just spewed carbon everywhere. So working at RWE today is my redemption tour.
Look, we all need redemption, some more than others, but anyway, but glad you're on the tour.
And at RWE, we are one of the largest providers of green energy, clean energy here in the US. We do 10 gigawatts of clean energy supply in the US, and for numbers, that would serve about 5 million people. Interestingly, the AI conversation, how it ties in, the plant I worked at was a gig, and it served about 500 to 600,000 people on the east side of Greater London. Microsoft is in a contract to build one power station that will serve one data center that is a gig. And for me, when I think about that, it blows my mind, especially because I worked in the industry. And so, yes, there's a lot of good that will come from AI, but I also struggle with what we're doing right now. So I say that knowing that this will be an opportunity for RWE to generate a lot of business. So I'm speaking for myself. And I genuinely think the opportunity that AI provides is to help us figure out ways to deploy clean energy faster, because we can now, the planning and the design of projects that used to take months can now happen in hours, literally, because you can have AI tools. And the productivity gains that the individuals who work at RWE, at companies in the clean energy space, the productivity gains that can happen there will, I think, balance things out, because then we can much quicker get assets, clean energy assets on the grid. I'll touch on one other thing that's been, my boss and I have been quite keen on this, and I know I'm still allowed to talk about environmental justice here. So
It's still a free speech zone so far, so yeah.
Exactly,
go for it, yeah.
exactly. Traditionally, we've deployed assets for utilities in places without real consideration for the people who live there. The story I share is of one of the tribal lands. They had transmission lines passing through, and they were getting the price of a cup of pick your latte from Starbucks for those lines passing through those lands. And there's the Alliance for Clean Energy up in, I believe, the Northwest. It ties back to AI because a lot of analysis to determine what the price should be to compensate the tribal lands. And they managed to get that to happen, ended up getting a few $1 million. And it's those sort of rebalancing of what we've done that we can now model much quickly. Companies that didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do that can use these tools to better advocate for themselves. And I strongly believe there's a ton of opportunity to do that with tribal lands, with Black farmers. And so I'm as excited as I am a little bit worried is maybe the best way to frame the introduction of AI into this whole conversation about sustainability in the US and globally, frankly. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Alyson?
I work at Dell Technologies, and we make the products that go into data centers like server storage and networking devices. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on is how do we make, once the energy's in the data center, how do we make that energy used as efficiently as possible? We spend a lot of time working with customers on how to build out their future data centers. We talk about right-sizing their infrastructure that they're purchasing. So not every customer needs the latest and greatest, biggest AI machine, and so we want to inform them about what the right infrastructure is for their particular situation. Another thing that we work with customers a lot on is their cooling technologies. Right now, servers are air-cooled, most of them, kind of the way your desktop computer is. There's a fan that runs. That's not the most efficient way to cool a server. It gets really hot. And you have to not only spend energy to run those fans, you have to cool the entire room that the data center is in with a regular air conditioner. So we're seeing a lot of changes in cooling technologies around liquid cooling or immersion cooling that is using that heat more effectively, because about 40% of the energy used in a data center goes towards cooling, and that we're not going to be able to do that in this AI era. So we have liquid cooling is where there's a rack, data centers are full of racks that is just a tall column of computers stacked on top of each other. And liquid cooling has these tubes that go into it, and there's a few different ways that they're doing it these days. One is a cold plate that sits right on top of the chip, and it's cooled kind of the same way your radiator in your car cools it, or you can cool an entire rack or an entire row, or you can even do immersion cooling where you dip the entire server into an oil that is not conductive to electricity. And these are all really effective ways of removing heat. And that's a great way to save energy, and it's also very quiet, the immersion cooling. And, sorry, I really love this topic.
You go, you keep going, it's all good. Yeah.
Okay, and we've also seen customers do really cool things with the heat that data centers do generate. In Europe, we have people building entire office buildings around a data center so that the heat can then heat the offices. I forget whether it's Oxford or Cambridge that uses the data centers on campus to heat their swimming pools. So even though we're using this energy once in a data center, what are the ways that we can use it even more? And then the last thing that we help customers with a lot is telemetry, or just visibility into how much energy things are using. You can't improve what you can't measure, so there's a lot of work being done on the software side to help understand exactly where we can optimize. And I think, all of these things together, along with others, will help with this energy use, and that's what we're committed to.
I think that's a good
I was going
point.
to say there are some really interesting ideas around that. Like, I have a colleague that's looking at doing it on residential water heaters, like having small little mini data processors on, water heaters to heat up the water.
You do a city scale, you do all sorts of scales. I think the efficiency point is very important, that if you go back to the early 90s and the first emergences of data centers and they start getting some data, there's this worry that data centers would grow to become 10 or 20% of electricity consumption, but data centers are kind of hung in there like at 2%. And now we're projecting AI will take it to 10%, but I have a feeling the efficiency will counteract it, as it has for the last few decades, because there's algorithmic efficiency, making the algorithms more efficient, the chip efficiency you mentioned, and also the cooling efficiency. As it gets more expensive to run your data center, you have an incentive to invest in the efficiency. So the efficiency probably counteracts a lot of the growth that we're worried about.
Can I chime
Absolutely,
in there?
yeah.
One other thing that's become apparent, and you could probably speak to this a lot more than I can, but one of the things we found in our work is that we currently use graphic processing units to run train the AI models, but there's a whole new world of neural processing units that we genuinely don't know what the energy impacts will be. So there's a lot of work. I think EPRI is doing some work on that, and we're trying to connect with them on that. But there's this idea that we're making the projections based on GPUs, and you could probably speak to this as well, on GPUs that we kind of know how much energy they use, and the impact of training AI, which wasn't the intended purpose, is partly why we have so much requirement of GPUs. But what if we designed the chips differently with lower energy consumption in mind from the jump? So
AI-specific chips.
AI-specific
Yeah, that's
chips,
right.
yeah. So there's a bunch of work going on there that is also putting me on the hopeful side of where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually end up as a techno-optimist, but there are some real concerns around, as Margo said, where you put it, how you build it, what are the energy or water or noise or other impacts, who gets the jobs, who pays, this kind of thing. In the end, those are all real concerns, and we should take them seriously. I am kind of enthusiastic, though, that if we have an AI system, there are a lot of energy use cases. We can manage the grid more intelligently. We have variable supply and variable demand. Maybe we can manage that a little bit better, maybe with better predictions or a better assessment of that data. We can use AI to accelerate fusion reactor design. Fusion reactor design is very difficult, but we can start to take a process that takes months for iteration to days. I think Javad made that point. Maybe we can combine it with robotics to accelerate the discovery of new chemistries for batteries. There's already a company that exists that uses AI to manage transformer life so that we only replace transformers when there's really a problem rather than just replacing at a certain age, and that eases up the transformer backlog. And had a conversation a year ago with someone at Department of Energy about permitting and how many permits are standard boilerplate, 1,500-page permits, 85% of it's standard stuff. Having AI read that and summarize it is a pretty good use case. So we could use AI to accelerate permitting for clean energy projects. So there's a lot of good news with AI that I think will be interesting on top of the efficiency investments Alyson mentioned. So maybe there's a good news story here. I do worry about what it means for the plight of humanity and ethics. I've got other concerns that are more philosophical, but there is bad news on the energy, water, sustainability front in terms of the resource consumption. There's good news looming in terms of what it enables, in which way it breaks will be very important. I end up being kind of optimistic on that, but it reminds me of hydraulic fracturing, where on average, hydraulic fracturing only needs like 1% of the water, but in that community, it might be 100% of the new water. And so hydraulic fracturing, oil and gas companies are competing with parks and libraries and schools or municipalities for that new water, but on average it's small. And these data centers, it's small on average, but it might be 100% of the new power available in that community. So we get some like tension between the here and now in this location versus the average, and we have to sort of distinguish all of that. One question we had, and then we'll go to the audience in maybe 10 minutes or so for questions. One thing we talked about in our prep was the role of partnerships and alliances and collaboration. All of you collaborate in different ways. Maybe we'll start with Alyson and go the other way this time, but what is the role of partnerships and collaboration, and how do you do it at Dell, or how have you done it in your other roles in life?
I mean, conversations like this are really critical, where we're getting academia, industry, government all together. I think that, you know, the industry as a whole is going through transformation. We're using more power as the globe, and the power types are also transitioning at the same time, and so working very closely with the government on how to do that in the right way, how to get those permits fast for all different types of energy is really critical. And we do that by working. The only way to do that is by working together.
You just mentioned types of energy. I got to follow up on that. I mean, in Texas, we have a lot of wind and solar and oil and gas, and you name it. We do a lot of everything, except for hydro. We don't have a lot of hydro. We don't have much water, but and we don't have much geothermal, but we do have the geothermal startups here, which is kind of interesting. And the Trump administration seems very openly hostile to wind and solar, but very supportive of nuclear and geothermal, and which tends to line up well with data center. Like, I say one of the areas where the Trump administration and the Biden administration agree is the importance of winning the AI arms race. I don't think we've agreed that AI is good, but we have agreed we need to win it, win the race. So, anyway, so it's like we don't know if it's good or bad, but we know we don't want those guys to beat us at it or whatever, sort of the sense. And there's agreement between Biden and Trump on that, and this pro-nuclear, pro-geothermal push. You mentioned the types of energy. How do you think, as a data center equipment provider, do you think about that, or do you think about chip design that needs to be variable or not? Do you have any comments on that? And maybe that wasn't fair to put on you, but I can pass it down to RW and others.
I think that the industry, if we want as many types of energy as possible in the best way possible, and if we have the battery technology for solar and wind, you know, as things become more profitable, businesses do them. And
they'll go that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to get to work on the AI problems that will solve the energy crisis, and then we can use it.
I mean, nuclear looks great for data centers, except that it's very expensive and slow to build, and we're in a race right now, right? So it's hard to get nuclear built next year. But wind and solar sure look fast, but then they're variable, so we gotta mix and match. I mean, these are your customers calling, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because there's a lot of interest in small modular reactors, and the likelihood of any one of those coming online in the next 4 years is next to zero.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of excitement for these things that don't address the demand that is here today. Okay. And so we're ending up having to make concessions. BP decided today that they'll be going right back to just forgetting all the green promises they made before. And I'm not bashing BP. It's because those oil companies, oil and gas companies, are being approached by the hyperscalers because they need power now. So as much as we can figure out how to use AI for good, which is to get more clean energy projects designed, built, permitted quickly, combined with storage, which will be critical regardless of what the fuel source is, I think we'll do ourselves a huge favor. It's quite unfortunate because the firm power that the data centers need, to a certain extent, clean energy doesn't quite provide it as well. So what are the combinations? We might have to make some concessions about gas with some carbon capture or something. And it even pains me to say that, but if we want to
turbine, there might be some
exactly, yeah.
The thing about nuclear, so I've got all sorts of thoughts about nuclear, but about a year and a half ago, Governor Abbott was here at UT with Clay Sell, the CEO of X Energy, and also the CEO of Dell, because they announced some small modular reactors on the Texas coast for Dell's facilities. Dow used a lot of energy to make chemicals. They wanted to decarbonize. Nuclear is a way to do it. And Governor Abbott was banging the table. We need clean energy, and we need it here, and we need it in 5 years. And the SML provider leaned over and said, well, how about 8 years? So it's kind of this comment, like, even the people selling SMRs like, we can't do it in 5 years, but 8. And that's okay. We need energy in 8 years as well. But that doesn't solve the here to now problem. I did I moderated a session last June in front of like 500 people where we did some quizzes, and it was like a fun thing where we asked audience questions. And one of the audience questions we asked is, of the 3 nuclear options, which one will come to market fastest? Large fission, small modular reactors, like small fission, or fusion? And it's kind of interesting how the audience answered. And the answer is none of the above. It's actually old large fission, 3 Mile Island, is going to come back online. We didn't see that even in June, and it was announced in September. And so we're going back to resuscitate old nuclear because of this need for power, which is interesting. And I think that's part of the conundrum is data centers say they want 24/7 power. I think they're kind of fussy. We ask them, can you be flexible? No, we can't be flexible at all. Well, if we raise your price a lot for firm power, we can be flexible. They're like, actually, no, we can be flexible. So I think there's more flexibility than is admitted. Yeah. In fact, there was a study that just came out of Duke Energy and RMI, whatever, a couple of days ago, maybe last week, talking about a little flexibility goes a long way to accelerate data centers. So we might see some, which is like the virtual power plant model, essentially. We might see some of that coming online. Anyway, Javad, any comments on like alliances or partnerships or how to collaborate or forms of power, whatever you want to talk about? Any comments? Yeah.
So just to your point about the data centers and the need that they have, so there are ways that you could either have all of your computations run in one location, or you could distribute them across different data centers. So there are possibilities for, depending on the needs of that local grid that you're connected to, maybe you could push some of your computation somewhere else for some time to save the grid or help the grid or whatever that need is.
I mean, the training is because there's the training and then the deployment. So the training and then the inference, I guess we say. And the training kind of can be done anywhere. In the inference, you want to be closer to your customer. But the training, I think we have a national security interest in the training being done here. And so that's part of the desire. But when I talk to the training companies, they'll say latency from one end to the other end of the data center is a problem. That the time lag from the photon moving from one edge of your hyperscale center to the other is enough to affect their training. And so they might not split the training from Canada and Texas, but maybe the inference could be, if you want the inference close. But there are probably some non-critical loads like streaming Hulu or something, or Netflix or whatever, where you can dispatch to different locations because you can move the photons a lot easier than the electrons in some cases. There might be some opportunity for geographic dispatching, where you move it around based on where the wind is available or the sunshine's available. We did a paper on that back in 2011 here at UT, and it's slowly gaining. It was like one of those things like at university sometimes you have a good idea, and a few decades later it might actually happen. So, but I think there's some of the training that might be hard to do because they complain about the latency, and so we'll see.
And that's a fair point, I think. But I think we have algorithmic also efficiency working for us that you could. That a lot of those designs could be flexible as well. But to your point about like the alliances, I think that's really the key for pushing a lot of the AI development and being mindful of the energy use and all of those. And different partners look at this differently. We have partnership with Department of Energy, for example, that they're looking at how we could build the next generation of tools for optimizing the grid dispatch across the United States and how you could use AI to make that go faster. We have alliance with Department of Defense that is they're interested in understanding the national security implications of adversary getting into the system, whether it's from the customer side or whether on the big power plant side. And also, different agencies are interested in pushing that efficiency forward. There are battery startups. There are startups that are interested in designing models that could run their assets better, like including accounting for degradation, accounting for assets lifetime. All of those integrated into those models. And a lot of those, I think, depending on who you're talking to and what kind of needs they have, that would the way they're using AI would be very different. But bottom line, a lot of those algorithms that you're developing for one partner could be reused and improved for the next one. But what we are seeing excites a lot of our partners, at least the partnership that we have between UT and government and industries, is that the possibilities that AI provides for doing a better prediction, doing a better decision making, and all of that. To your point about virtual power plants, One of the, it's a very interesting idea, like having all of those small scale assets talk to each other and coordinate. And you need to be able to do a lot of those computations close to the asset or on device.
Right.
So how can you develop those AI tools that would process those information locally?
We're getting there.
Yes.
I think there are examples, like virtual power plants are so much cheaper than building a real power plant, right? If you could just
They
coordinate
are,
the
yeah.
assets.
They're not quite, I mean, they're happening in very small little pockets here and there right now. I mean, it hasn't been adopted on any scale yet.
But I
it's
foresee
close.
that. But I
So
foresee
close.
that
We're so
AI
close.
being a key, like enabler.
It's absolutely critical. Like that's one of the
You are trying to
solutions.
squeeze as much as kilowatts as you can.
Because you
out
have
of
to
all
have
of these
that
guys.
telemetry, and there's no way to do that except with better technology.
The key thing here is probably you're saying, I don't know if, I think a lot of you know this or all of you know this, but to make the grid balance, supply has to match demand. And historically, we ramp supply up and down to follow how our demand changes as we turn lights on and off and that kind of. So our demand is kind of going crazy through the day, and we turn the power plants up and down to follow that load. But now we're adding in variability in supply with wind and solar as well. So we have moving supply and moving load. And a great way to solve that was with batteries, but also turning things off is just as good for the grid as turning a power plant on. And I think there's this promise of new technology, we can do it, but in all honesty, the French have been doing this since the 70s. With analog technology, they send a pulse down the wires that turns off 2 gigawatts of electric water heaters on like 1 second notice, and then they turn it off at 10 p.m. and they turn them back on at 8 a.m. They've been doing demand response with analog 1970s technology very effectively for decades. I feel like we need to catch up, but now we have digital tools and AI, we can do it predictably.
We don't have a vertically integrated market.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons they can do it that we can't. Yeah, but we could pay people. Americans love money. We could pay them. Hey, I'll pay you $1 if you turn that off. What we'll do for $1 is
We will
amazing.
be doing that.
Yeah.
I think we'll be doing that within 5 years. That we'll
Absolutely.
have like and that will be what AI is able to do, is taking those demand response. I mean, the battery stuff that we're working on right now is interesting, but for low-income people, where we're interested in making a real impact, being able to pay people to just say, hey, can you, turn up your air conditioner 3 degrees for the next 30 minutes, and we're going to pay you, $10 to do that, and maybe it only happens 3 times in a month, but for somebody who's really struggling to pay their bill.
I mean, that's like 4 eggs at $30.
4 eggs.
You could get 4. You could.
Like 4 eggs.
But I think,
So I think that is very much, I think we're really right at the edge of that. I think in some ways the battery piece is a little easier to coordinate because, well, there's lots of reasons that we probably don't have.
they're fast responding. But I think right now we do it on a volunteer. But hey, do you mind turning off your air conditioner? People are like, yeah, I mind.
But you have
like,
to be able to do
hey,
that on
I'll pay you
scale to
$5.
If you can
Yeah.
monetize it, you need AI to be able to do that on scale. You can't.
And make it like you
They
just,
did it. You said they, honest.
It could be done. I think
A
people
very
can be
small
motivated.
market, but not in this market environment.
Yeah.
We do have, I was going to say, with alliances, I mean, the state does have an aggregated distributed energy resources task force. It's called ADER task force. It's one of the more exciting
It's as
things.
fun as it sounds. Yeah,
It is. I'm on it. It's
a good
actually
task
pretty
force.
fun. But
I meant that unironically. Like it's distributed
Right.
energy to task force. That sounds
it's
great.
really super geeky, but it is fun. But you do have sort of, when you say the alliances, you have sort of all of the different stakeholders at the table in Texas. So you have the utilities and you have the retail electric providers, the utilities being the wires. You have the retail electric providers. You have the generators at the table. You have like the kind of people like us that are like, wait, this has to be equitable. And so there is that alliance going on right now, and that group that we're really working to sort of create policy changes at the Public Utility Commission through ERCOT to make all of this solutions-based virtual power plant kind of technology be able to scale. So I just think that the real-world environment is a lot slower than the sort of conceptualization of and the creation of the technology. And so I'd say, like, what we do is try to, like, now get it on the ground. Like, great, it can do all that, but has it? Has it in a real-world environment? So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is work with, like, real-world housing authorities that help, where people live, and be like, can we bring this here? Can we work with Sunrun, or can we work with, the batteries? Can you actually make it happen? And it's just slow.
Go ahead, Javad.
To your point, like deployment is such a key word here. that a lot of tools that we develop, they don't really get deployed. I think
It's hard, I can tell you. It's just a lot of, it's really complex. So like most people's eyes glaze over, like you all showed up, but let me tell you, you're like a rare breed.
We're here for the cocktail hour.
So most people, like, you go and they're like, what? And it's complex. It's really complicated. And so it's like, how do we, I used to sit in those ADR task force and say, boy, the communications people need to like get into this industry, because it's hard to put it into layman's terms for people to say,
Highly
like,
technical,
I'm
a lot
in.
of jargon, yeah.
It's really hard. And so bringing it, down to the ground, down to the real world environment, even though I think once you can sort of match clean energy to demand through batteries, through demand response, we will have a much cleaner energy grid, but it's going to take a little while to get there.
Vlad, why don't you looks like you want to make a comment, then we'll go to the audience for questions.
Sure. So I think the other two deployment issues, I think one of the other big problems we have in general with energy networks is lack of real data to train these models. So a lot of times what we are using is simulated data that we use.
Synthetic data, yeah, synthetic data, that's right.
Right.
And that has been like the Department of Energy like paid for a whole bunch of those that has been developed. But I think that's still lacking. That's still like really slow us down because we don't have access to real data for good. And a lot of utilities are careful with the data they have because that's critical information. But that has been also like slowing down the development of the AI on the energy system.
We're going to run out of data at some point, which is kind of fascinating. One thing that hasn't been said yet, we should say, is that this is happening in Texas. Texas is at the forefront of it. A lot of the companies that make the innovative technologies that AI needs are here in Texas, like Dell, and some of the companies building the power plants we need for data centers, like RW here in Texas, or the experts like Javad, or the people working on the alliances to make sure that as we do AI, we don't trample on everyone like Margo here. So this is happening in Texas. Texas is probably one of the big winners in terms of being one of the places where deployment at scale happens. Maybe Northern Virginia, maybe Alberta, Canada. There's only a few places around the world that are moving at scale and quickly on this. So it's really in our interest to figure this out so we do it the right way. And certainly will benefit if we are able to do it in the right way and clean way, and we're selling the chips or the power and that kind of thing. So a big opportunity for us to get it done the right way. With that, I think we can open up to audience, and maybe if we'll call on you, you ask your question, I'll repeat the question so it goes into the microphone. And Sarah, we do have mics. Okay, I should have known that. So, I'm pretty loud. But we'll probably, I think for online, we'll need to have them hear it on the microphone anyway. I think a microphone's coming to you. And I should say, we got like 10 minutes, so questions, no speeches, if you don't. Not that you're about to make a speech, but question, please.
In terms of energy sources, you mentioned that we have almost everything except hydro, and we definitely don't have big rushing rivers very often in the state, but we do have 400 miles of Gulf coastline, and I wonder how close are we to tidal being a possible factor?
Good question. Maybe I answer. Tidal energy works. Romans did it thousands of years ago to grind grain, but it works in places where you have big tidal separation, like Newfoundland or Brittany and certain other places, not in Texas. Our tidal separation's too low for it to work. So. But it does work in other places. Great question. Another question? Jen, your microphone. I just want to point, I'd like to take, I love Jen. She was my first student, by the way, Jen. So, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to ruin your...
That means I'm slightly old, but that's okay.
No,
that means you're older.
You were 8 years old when you were a student UT.
Thanks so much for y'all being here this evening after a long day of programming. You talked a little bit about the potential of AI to help modulate energy demand to better match supply. I'm also curious if y'all can share any thoughts about the potential of using AI to basically modulate fossil fuel-based energy production based on air quality impacts. So, for example, I used to work at Austin Energy, and on expected high ozone days, the utility would ramp down its gas plants. That was a day-ahead function. Is there something we can do at like a minutes or seconds ahead that integrates kind of meteorological and atmospheric data along with run rates at power plants and things like that to basically back off dirty generation so that we can reduce air pollution and reduce human health exposure?
That'd be a great, interesting use case, right? Because especially, I'm thinking coal plants or things that are hard to ramp could use some artificial intelligence to help. Any comments on that?
Yeah, first off, you should probably start that business. You will make a lot of money. I'm not joking about this because it is, back to his point about sort of, there's not as much real-time response going on as most people think. And some of that is just the technology, but some of that is also not knowing.
Some's operational habit,
Yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
it's
exactly.
the way you did it last year. Why would you
And
do
so
it?
we just
Right.
do it as we've done it. So, but it's not for lack of a desire to do it better, but no one is going to build that internally. Is maybe, I'm not talking about RWE, I'm talking about the power station I worked at. It's a tough ask to say, change this quickly, but if you show up with it and it works as promised, there's some money to be made, and that sadly tends to drive most decisions in the space.
I remember visiting the coal plant that Austin Energy owns and operates at LCRA, and if you ask the CFO, they'll say, oh, we can't ramp that coal plant. But if you go to the coal plant and you visit the control deck and ask them, can you ramp this? Like, we ramp it all day long, all day long. Yeah, it's a very rampable. So the financial answer is we can't ramp, but the technical answer, yeah, we can ramp.
Yep.
But you can get a mismatch in how fast you ramp the coal plant versus the scrubber, so there is some intelligence there.
Yeah, and if you've sort of sold ahead at a certain price, the real-time price might not match. So you're like, should I do this? You know, so you want to, but I do think there's an opportunity. And yes, AI can layer factors.
And I feel like this is an area where we actually have data to train it too, right? It's not, sorry, it's a great question. Where's the microphone now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yes.
Hi. I have like two questions tangentially related to one. So I know like one of you mentioned that the 3 Mile Island deal with Constellation and Microsoft, and like how that, my question is like, how is that going to affect like congestion? Can that like alleviate congestion, or is that like not a reliable solution for many data centers? And then tangentially related to that is like, I know during COVID, the load curves changed quite substantially. How is AI going to affect those? Is it going to be de minimis? Is it going to affect volatility of like when energy is needed and where? And
Great questions. I can talk about Constellation unless someone else wants to talk about 3 Mile Island. But so 3 Mile Island, first of all, there are not that many nuclear power plants that have been shuttered that can be reopened. So that's a special case, but there are a few in the United States, and there are big legal battles about what the cost implications are for that. Generally speaking, having large load on site should relieve congestion because you're not having to move the power long distances. But the question remains, do they need to connect to the grid at all? And if they need to connect to the grid, who pays and how much? In fact, there's a very large lawsuit right now going on between Constellation and Exelon about transmission charge, that kind of thing. But I think behind the meter solutions in general are congestion relieving. When we think behind the meter, usually we think solar and batteries, maybe a gas microgrid. I don't think we thought nuclear macro grid, but that is a behind the meter solution, therefore should be helpful. By nuclear regulatory law, they still have to be connected to the grid. So you can't make it 100% isolated. That's an NRC or Nuclear Regulatory Commission rule. We'll maybe have a few more test cases with that of other shuttered nuclear power plants. It'll become more interesting, the question by me making more complex, when you have new nuclear built that's co-located, what does that do to congestion? Do you have to build a transmission line? And therefore, is that solving the problem because there's now more investment in transmission? Or is that going to add to congestion because we're using the same lines and competing with wind and solar for it? There are some notions that the data centers should build their own transmission and pay for it, but then sell it back to the grid over 10 years or something. Mm-hmm. And so the customer up front, Microsoft or whoever it is, will expand the transmission system to serve the data center, but then will be reimbursed for having done that over some time. They do that in Alberta and other places. So whether it worsens or improves congestion will depend on what you're building and where you build it and that kind of thing. And this is very important, but behind the meter solutions are desirable because of their congestion relief in general. And then you had a question about changing load shapes. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that. Or the problem with me as a professor is like, I'll answer every question. So I've got thoughts, of course. Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. I think like when you look at like, as we discussed earlier, I think when you look at the data centers and how much they're consuming, they're supposed to consume like 24/7. So they're always consuming information depending on how much how much computing load you're giving them. That would impact it, but I think that would, depending on like how the load shape would look like and how much computing they're going to do, that would add to the load curve that we have today. So you could look at it as an offset that would be added to today's load curve.
And we might have more impact. So a AI-enabled search is more energy intensive than a Google search. Mm-hmm. and it will happen as we're working, so it might be different between 8 to 5 during working hours. With COVID and work from home, gasoline consumption dropped, electricity consumption went up, and our electricity consumption in commercial settings dropped, but residential electricity went up. And a lot of us at home, our air conditioners are less efficient than commercial systems, so that there are some efficiency losses in that. We'll see what happens with the AI.
Hi, my name's Natalie. You kind of touched on environmental justice issues concerning energy and how AI has been used to address those in the past. And with current policy shifts with the current administration, I'd be really interested to know how, as these models are being developed to address future issues, if you're going to be able to develop them with those environmental justice issues in mind. And 10, 5, 4 years down the road, if these models aren't developed with vision for addressing environmental justice issues, are you going to be able to go back and change the base training to be able to address that?
Margo, you have a comment?
I guess I can. I mean,
It's your question. I mean, it's kind of your question, Margo, too.
Right. I think that the challenge is it's not one issue because there's a whole bunch of issues around the justice and how equitable both the benefits and the challenges and costs are shared. So as Michael was saying, I do think that there is interest and there's an understanding that we need to, from the front end, sort of think who's going to cover the costs of this. I think, we've talked a little bit about like why you have to look at the siting. I mean, historically, we haven't done a great job of citing problematic industry in low-income areas. So again, I think there's people looking at that. It's largely sound, heat, water, those kinds of things in those areas. So it just depends on what issue you're looking at. And then I think the hope is that it might be able to solve some issues that could help equity, and environmental justice by being able to optimize use of clean energy sources by better sort of flexing the load so that and having more batteries really, or this demand response taking it all down when you've got peak demand. So there's ways that it will help, I think. And can you undo things? I mean, I think
Ways it could help. We'll see.
Ways it could help.
have
There's
to-
ways it could help.
Yeah.
There's ways it could hurt. And can you undo it? I mean, I think that's the question for a lot of things we're looking at right now. And I don't know if we know the answer to that.
I'm optimistic, but I would say the models have not had equity front and center in mind so far. It's mostly about creating new capability. We have 2 minutes left and 2 more questions, but you're about to make a comment on this?
No, I said, hence my sigh.
Yeah.
It's so disheartening to see what has happened. And we're talking earlier about the fact that those websites where you would get the incomplete data, which it was, have disappeared now. And a few entities tried to download before they disappeared, and the work now is to aggregate or re-aggregate so that people can do the necessary work of ensuring that anything we build is built with equity and an eye for the social justice elements here.
Let me just say that there are a lot of entities that have tried to save that information and downloaded it quickly.
Yeah.
And so it disappeared, but it can resurface.
Yeah.
We are trying to help resurface some of that information. One of our staff is in the back right now, and he's working on all sorts of things, right, Mo?
We got 90 seconds, 2 questions. Why don't we ask both questions, then we'll do quick answers, and then we'll set everyone free. The question back here, yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. I guess this isn't necessarily my field of expertise, so I wanted to ask a specific question here in Texas, which is just about the Stargate, the federal investment project for AI, is already underway here with some relatively large data centers being built in Abilene right now. Based on your guys' expertise, do you feel like energy generation in Texas and the grid is going to be able to keep up with the demand that's already underway? And what impact might we see on these smaller communities and their access to energy and water?
Okay, great question. Peter, let's get your question, and then we'll do some answers.
Yeah, hopefully this isn't too complicated, but
Well, then don't ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Moving a bit more to maybe what AI could inform us on is I feel like there often winds up around virtual power plants, around, some business models, around aggregation. You get this stuff of, well, how do you actually test that this works? You have to do energy sandbox or, innovation sandboxing on a network that requires regulatory procedures. Are we doing any kind of AI work that looks at, if you introduce a time of rate or dynamic pricing in this area, do we have behavioral models of how people actually react to that stuff? Can you make
Working on it.
money?
That's that ADER task force.
Yeah.
Trying to
So
take
that was kind of my general thing, because I've
Question,
just seen
so-
this space has a lot of potential, but then getting the data or the results that say, yes, this is a viable business model for me as an aggregation company, how do I even know that?
any quick response? Can Texas load growth keep up with data center demand, and who does that impact? And do we have any evidence that AI is going to actually have some benefits for us in the energy
The
sector?
quick answer is I think it will. We can. The real issue is what will be the source of the fuel. I think that's the real conundrum here.
I agree with you. I think I'm hoping also we are making enough investment in the transmission grid along the way, because we haven't invested as much in that, like, for some time.
Yeah, I think power plants to keep up, transmission might not keep up. So that's why you get behind the meter solutions. I think there are some results on whether virtual power plants, other things that work. There are some use cases from MP2 way back when, and GE with their Predict software. There have been some examples, but the counterfactuals are always hard to generate. So,
Right now, we have a couple. We have Tesla, and we have the Bandera Electric Co-op.
Bandera Electric Co-op, they're rocking and rolling.
I
on this.
love them so
These
much.
rural co-ops are way ahead of the schedule. We love
Yeah.
Bandera.
So they're trying it, and then we'll have some data. I mean, I'm not sure Tesla will share their data, and that's a real challenge. I think a lot of the problem is and we even have this, is like, okay, well, what will you show us as we're looking at this? Because a lot of them don't want to show their data because it's proprietary. I think Bandera might be more open, but we need enough to, they also want the changes in the policy and in the system to be able to make it successful, so they have to share a certain amount of that data to justify change. So it's in the process, it's just slow.
I think we need to stop there. We're already gone over time, but thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and for joining me and thanking the panel.